June 23, 1943. 0700 hours. Russell Islands, Solomon Chain. Lieutenant Commander John Blackburn stood at the edge of the coral runway, watching the strange, hulking aircraft bounce along the strip. The nose of the fighter was so massive that the pilot couldn't even see forward until the tail lifted. It looked more like a flying oil drum than a combat aircraft. It was the F4U Corsair, and nobody trusted it. 3,000 miles away in Tokyo, Commander Minoru Jinda pored over the latest intelligence. His face tightened into a smirk. The Americans were killing more of their own pilots with this new fighter than the Japanese were. In training alone, the Corsair had taken down more Marines than the Zero had in combat. The U.S. Navy had already rejected it for carrier use. It stalled violently, snapped without warning, and bounced so hard on landing that it shattered landing gear and spines alike. To Jinda and the Imperial Japanese Navy, it was a gift, a deadly one, but only to Americans. Veteran pilots at Rabaul celebrated the reports. The enemy had made their fighters even heavier, even clumsier, and that meant the Zero, with its tight turns, graceful climbs, and samurai precision, would keep ruling the skies. Japan's aces had every reason to believe it. Their best pilots, like Lieutenant Junior Grade Saburo Sakai, had 800 flight hours before they even saw combat. Sakai once flew a captured F4F Wildcat and said it handled like a delivery truck. All muscle, no grace, he wrote. A flying box. So when whispers of a new American fighter, even bigger, even heavier, reached Zero pilots, they laughed. Tokyo intelligence called it the Whistling Death, not out of fear, but mockery. The first Corsair squadrons arrived in the Pacific in early 1943. Marine Fighting Squadron 124, VMF 124, was the first. They were also the first to start burying pilots. The aircraft's massive 2,000 horsepower engine created vicious torque. Takeoffs turned into wrestling matches. Pilots couldn't see the runway. Landings bounced them into pieces. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington nearly died on his first landing. "It just drops out of the sky at 70 knots, he said later. 1 second you're flying, the next you're crashing. No warning. No mercy. They called it the Ensign Eliminator. And in those first 6 months, America lost more Corsairs to accidents than to enemy gunfire. At Rabaul, Japanese officers took notes and chuckled. One air operations officer joked that they should send medals to the Vought factory for doing Japan's work for them. But then the combat reports began to change. Zeros were going missing, not in the twisting, balletic dogfights the Japanese trained for, but in sudden, brutal dives. Survivors reported a sound they'd never heard before, a scream on the wind, a whistle just before the bullets came. And then it was too late. On May 13, 1943, over the Russell Islands, Lieutenant Ken Walsh of VMF 124 found himself alone. 3 Zeros circling in for the kill. He did the one thing training told him not to do. He tried to dogfight. The Zero pilots pounced, pushing their advantage. Walsh had no choice. He pushed the throttle forward, and the Corsair surged. The airspeed indicator jumped, 400 knots. 420, 440. The controls stayed solid. The airframe didn't even flinch. He pulled out of the dive, the Zeros were gone. Not dead, just left behind, unable to follow. Their frames were too light. They would have disintegrated if they tried. Walsh pulled up, climbed hard, rolled back over the top, and dove again. 6 Browning. 50 caliber machine guns opened fire. 1 Zero exploded midair. Another caught fire and spiraled downward. The last tried to escape, but Walsh followed. One more burst, another kill. He had just rewritten the laws of Pacific air combat. Forget turning. Forget graceful dogfights. It was now about speed, altitude, and shock power. The Corsair could climb to 25,000 feet before a Zero even touched 20. It could dive at speeds that shattered the laws of Zero aerodynamics. And those 6.50 caliber guns could erase a fighter in seconds. By July, Commander Jinda in Tokyo stopped smiling. His aces weren't losing fights. They were being ambushed by ghosts. The Corsairs were attacking from above, at speeds the Zeros couldn't match, and disappearing into the sky before Japan's finest even knew they were there. And worst of all, the Americans had stopped trying to dogfight. They were hunting. Japan's top ace, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, encountered Corsairs for the first time on August 7th. They came from the sun, he wrote. By the time we saw them, they were firing. My comrades were dead before they touched the controls. And when I tried to chase, the American vanished. I couldn't catch him. It was like flying against thunder. The math was flipping. In early 1943, Zeros enjoyed a 3-to-1 kill advantage. By September, Corsairs were flipping the ratio, 7-to-1 against the Zeros. Captain Robert Hansen scored 20 kills in 6 weeks. Lieutenant Ken Walsh had 21 in 3 months. This wasn't luck. It was physics. It was training. It was evolution. The Zero had no armor. No self-sealing tanks. 1.50 caliber hit turned it into a fireball. And the Corsair? It could take hits, dish out hell, and never get touched. Chief Petty Officer Toshio Oda, ground crew at Rabaul, remembered watching the wreckage come back. Before, American bullets made small holes. Now they tore planes apart. We found wings with holes the size of helmets. Fuselages shattered like wood. And many didn't return at all. And high above them, the Corsairs circled. Not fighters. Hunters. Altitude was ammunition. Speed was survival. In a Corsair, you didn't dogfight. You hunted. You dove. You fired. You climbed. If a Zero got on your tail, you didn't twist and turn. You just shoved the stick forward and vanished. At 400 knots, nothing could follow a Corsair. And while the Marines mastered this brutal new logic of aerial war, Japan's top aces were watching their world fall apart. The math was cold and merciless. It took 2 years to train a competent Zero pilot. Those swirling, samurai-style dogfights took hundreds of flight hours to master, an art form that couldn't be rushed. But the Corsair didn't care about art. Its tactics could be taught in months. Slash in, fire a burst, escape. No dancing. No elegance. Just results. American pilots were entering the Pacific with barely 200 hours of flight time, and were scoring kills against Japan's finest, pilots with 10 times the experience. By November 1943, Japanese naval aviation wasn't just losing. It was bleeding out. The best pilots Japan had ever trained, men raised in the warrior code, were being systematically erased by a machine they had once mocked. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi's report to Tokyo pulled no punches. The enemy has abandoned honorable combat. They attack from advantage and flee when challenged. Their new fighter is faster than our fastest, climbs higher than our highest, and hits harder than we can absorb. We are not losing to better pilots. We are losing to better machines. And the deeper truth was even more terrifying. The Corsair was multiplying. By the end of the war, 7,829 Corsairs would roll off American assembly lines. Japan would manage to build 10,939 Zeros total, but across 4 brutal years and countless scattered fronts. By late 1943, Corsairs were arriving faster than Zeros could be replaced. Every dead Japanese pilot represented years of irreplaceable training. Every American loss was replaced within weeks, with 2 more pilots ready to hunt. Commander Minoru Genda, once the man who scoffed at the Corsair as a death trap, now faced the truth. In his combat report dated December 1943, he wrote, "We mocked their aircraft as too difficult to fly. We failed to understand that difficulty meant capability. A machine that challenges its own pilots will destroy those who never faced such challenges." The Corsair is not a dogfighter. It is an executioner. The psychological impact was devastating. Japanese pilots, once feared across the Pacific, now flew with anxiety clawing at their nerves. Lieutenant Tio Tanamo, one of the few aces to survive the war, remembered the shift. In 1942, we owned the sky. American pilots feared us. In 1944, we feared them, not their skill, their machines. You would hear that whistle and no death was diving on you. You couldn't outclimb it. You couldn't outrun it. You could only try to turn. And while you turned, another Corsair was already diving from above. The Marines proved it in blood. VMF 214, the Black Sheep Squadron, flew Corsairs from September 1943 to January 1944. In just 4 months, they shot down 97 Japanese aircraft. They lost 12 Corsairs, and most of those to flak. Not dogfights. The math was done. The Zero wasn't fighting anymore. It was being hunted. On January 14, 1944, First Lieutenant Robert Hansen delivered the ultimate demonstration. 1 mission, 1 hour and 45 minutes. 5 kills, not in a swirling melee, but 5 separate, calculated attacks. Climb, spot, dive, fire, climb, repeat. The Zeros never laid a finger on him. He landed with 400 rounds remaining. His Corsair undamaged, aside from paint scuffs from enemy debris. By war's end, the Corsair's record was undeniable. 2,140 enemy aircraft destroyed. 189 Corsairs lost in air-to-air combat. A kill ratio of over 11 to 1. The plane Japan had called suicidal to fly had become the most lethal American fighter of the Pacific War. Over 1,000 victories credited to Marine Corsair pilots alone. Captain Philip DeLong of VMF 212 said it best. The Japanese trained for 20 years to fight the last war. They came expecting a dance. We brought a sledgehammer. The Corsair couldn't dance, but it could kill. Those 650s would saw a zero in half before the pilot knew we were there. And the final toll? By August 1945, of the thousands of Japanese naval aviators who once laughed at the Corsair, fewer than 100 remained alive. They had been trained for tradition. The Corsair had been trained for victory. The whistle of those wing-root oil coolers wasn't just a noise anymore. It was the sound of death diving from the sun. It was the sound of an empire losing the skies. The lessons would echo for decades. Air combat was no longer about elegance. It was about speed, altitude, firepower, and who could build faster than they could be killed. Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's greatest surviving ace, said it plainly. We laughed when we heard American pilots were dying in training accidents. We thought it showed their inferiority. We didn't understand. They were learning to master a machine we couldn't match. By the time we stopped laughing, most of us were already dead. The Corsair, ugly, brutal, and born dangerous, had become the sky's deadliest predator. And the final laugh belonged to the bent-wing bird that couldn't even see the runway on takeoff.